Vengeance by George Willson. Chapter 4. Holding Sanity Hostage. We allowed Athena back into her house after we had completed our forensic sweeps and decided we had all the evidence we could get. While she was nervous about staying in the house by herself, she also did not feel she would be comfortable anywhere else, including Mrs. Brackett's house, where she was certain she had worn out her welcome, even though Kathy had no problem with her remaining. I asked about anyone else in the area she could stay with, but the only family she had was her mother in Monument, who had left on a long trip the day before. Depending on how far news traveled and where she was going, she might or might not know about this for some time. On the day after Athena had returned home to the grisly scene, she had the news playing in her kitchen as she stood nearby, looking like a woman who had not slept well, regardless of how comfortable she thought she might be. Her hair was in complete disarray, and she wore old paint-stained sweatpants and a t-shirt that had seen better days. According to news transcripts from the time of day when this piece occurred, the anchor on Channel 3 was broadcasting the following. Today on News 3 at noon, the City Council voted 8-4 yesterday in favor of using the vacant wing of the Bluffs Mental Health Facility as a temporary holding pen for minimum security prisoners. More on that story and more in segment 2. But first, our top story. Bluffs University experienced its second tragedy in only 2 days in the form of another double homicide. 2 students were found by a groundskeeper this morning, stabbed to death in a wooded area just outside their dorms. Our KBLF correspondent, John Franklin, is on the scene. John? Athena turned off the television with a scowl, pushing down the feelings of fear that warned her that the killer was still out there. She reached over to a tub of cottage cheese with a spoon in it. "Did you sleep with her too, Professor Michaels?" Athena asked out loud with considerable disgust. She took a bite of her comfort food, and with her mouth full uttered, "Make me sick." She carried her cottage cheese tub to the dining room table and sat in her spot at one end. The diminutive table still had 2 placemats and candlesticks at either end for the pair of them ready for her to set the dishes and food for breakfast or dinner. She stared at the setup, wondering to herself how everything could have been so wrong when it felt so right. She dropped her head onto an arm on the table and cried as she thought back to her last meal with Hank the morning she had gone to her mother's. It was all so perfect at the time. The table was set with silverware and glasses of milk and coffee. She had just served a complete breakfast with eggs, sausage, and pancakes, as she often did for him, and they sat across from each other before starting out on their days. Hank told her she didn't need to work since he wanted to support her, so most of her days were spent ensuring the house was in top condition and properly set for any company they might have. This was an exception, of course, since she was going to be gone all day. "Another beautiful Tuesday," she said to Hank as she placed the last dish and sat with a flourish across from him. "So, you'll be heading to your mother's in Monument," Hank confirmed, taking his silverware in hand. "And staying the night," Athena finished. "Athena, it's been a year," Hank sighed, preparing a bite. "Don't you think your mother can get along without you coming over every week by now?" "Of course," she replied. "But without Dad, Mom just doesn't have anyone else to spend time with." "What about those church people?" Hank suggested, but Athena gave him a look which said, "You know what I mean." Hank nodded. "Okay, I get it. I wish you didn't have to go, but you're a fit example to us all on parental care. Well done." "Well, you call yours, which is more than a lot of people do," she offered. "At least I get points for that, right?" He smiled, taking a bite. "Yeah, but you get points for a lot of things." "And your going is just about your mother?" "Are you going to analyze me?" she asked seductively. "No, I was just asking," he replied, missing her look completely. She shrugged and took a bite. "I noticed you refilled your prescription." Athena paused in her chewing and swallowed her bite. She looked at him. "All right, doctor. Maybe if you'd spend a little more time with me." Athena started with some irritation. "Now, you know I need to work," Hank began. "Yes, but late every day?" she asked. "Then you meet with friends? Sometimes it feels like you're avoiding me." "I would never do that," Hank insisted. "I sure didn't avoid you last night, did I?" Athena smiled a little and shook her head. And every Sunday I'm right there by your side at our church, he noted. You don't think I'm doing anything I shouldn't, do you? He stared at her without a word, waiting for her response. Athena stirred her breakfast around on her plate. She shook her head again. I guess not, she finally answered. If you were getting what you needed elsewhere, I figure you wouldn't still be making love to me. See, he said triumphantly. I do love you. I know, Athena nodded. Why don't you come with me? I can't just take off during the week, Athena, Hank said. We should go over a weekend sometime. Okay, Athena nodded. I just want to see more of you. I'll see what I can do, Hank assured her. They didn't say much else during their perfect breakfast before Hank had left for the university. She wished their final full conversation had gone better, but at least she knows now why he always stayed late, and why he always let her go by herself. She had always gone during the week, so they had their weekends together. Little did she know at the time that it only allowed him to have company over for the evening. What really got to her was the conversation she had had with her mother that same evening. Like the conversation with Kathy, the subject had turned to adding a child to their family. She was sitting in the living room of the house she grew up in with her mother, Sharon Reynolds. The room was fairly small, with just enough room for a couch, chair, and television. It was all in a soft blue color which matched the curtains, and the carpet was a brown Berber which her mother liked because it was easy to keep clean, even when it wasn't. Between the couch and chair was a small coffee table, where they each had a coaster for their individual cups of tea, from which they drank as they talked. Sharon Reynolds was an average-looking woman in her late 50s with short salt-and-pepper hair and dressed in yellow pants and a white blouse with yellow flowers. She rarely wore makeup while at home and kept it to a minimum while out. She said that after the loss of her husband, Athena's father, she had no one to show off for anymore, so she refused to do more than she needed to for social norms. She did tend to dress up a little more for church, which she regularly attended primarily because they had become her family, with Athena living too far away to see regularly. I really feel like we're ready to start a family, Athena told her mother in a tone that felt more like she was trying to convince her mother of it, rather than telling her. We've been talking about it, and he seems really enthusiastic. Are you sure? Sharon asked. You tell me all the time that he's never home. I couldn't have done it without your father to back me up. Of course, Athena insisted, but he said he'll be there for me. I still think you should consider waiting a little longer before bringing a child into your lives, Sharon said in a cautionary tone. Of all people, Athena said, I thought you'd be happy to hear that you might be getting some grandchildren. The thought thrills me, Athena, her mother replied kindly. I'm just worried for you and the child if Hank decides he can't handle it. Hank is so wonderful to me, Mom, Athena protested. He cares for me, and he's not going anywhere. He's doing well at work, too. He works long hours sometimes, but that's his job. His students really seem to love him, too. That's got to count for something. That's wonderful, honey, Sharon said. You just let me worry, and as soon as I hear the good news, I'll be happy for you. Good, Athena said, feeling victorious for some reason. I just feel like my life is so perfect right now, nothing could go wrong. She finished her tea, placed the cup on her coaster on the coffee table, and leaned back on the couch. Sharon immediately stood, took Athena's cup, and walked to the kitchen. Athena watched her go for a moment before getting up and following her. The kitchen was little more than a line of cabinets around a small patch of white linoleum-covered floor with a stove and refrigerator. The countertops were littered with a microwave, mixer, blender, along with several other appliances, canisters for dry goods, and a couple of cookbooks. Sharon carried the cups to the sink and proceeded to wash them by hand. Athena walked in behind her and saw by her mother's expression that despite the apparent agreement they had only moments ago, her mother was still troubled by the idea of her having children. Sharon noticed Athena walk in behind her and sighed. I can't help but wonder what your father would think of all this, Sharon said. I don't know, Athena shrugged. He only let us get married because of me anyway. Poor Hank could never get on Dad's good side. Your father was very perceptive, may he rest in peace, Sharon said. I wish I'd learned more from him before he passed on. So many things in life can change so quickly that you never know what you have until it's taken away from you. "How are you holding up?" Athena asked, in part grateful to change the subject. "As well as could be expected," Sharon replied, wiping a tear from her eye before rinsing out their teacups. "I miss him terribly, of course, but I'm glad you decided to come by once a week to check on me." "Well, I couldn't have you trying to keep this place up all by yourself," Athena said. "And I appreciate it," Sharon said, "more than you'll ever know. You give me something else to look forward to. Speaking of forward, you'll keep an eye on the place while I'm on my trip, right? I've already asked that, haven't I?" "Only every week for the last 6 months," Athena laughed. "I even said I'd take you and your stuff over to the church to help you load up tomorrow morning." "Sorry, I'm just nervous," Sharon said. "I've gone on mission trips before, but never out of the country, and never for an entire month." "It'll be great," Athena assured her. "You'll have fun, I just know it. You just better take care of yourself." "I will," Sharon said. She sighed. "And of course, I promise that whatever you and Hank decide will be fine with me. After all, there's no time like the present, right?" "Thanks, Mom," Athena said, and they hugged. "I love you." "I love you too, Athena." The doorbell startled Athena out of her memories, and she sat upright back in her living room. For a moment she wondered if she had imagined the sound. She felt sweat beading on her forehead and walked to the kitchen for a paper towel to wipe her forehead as well as her eyes and nose, as the tears and snot had slowly taken over as she was reminiscing. She shook her head at her stupidity once more, recalling how wonderful she thought everything was, when it turned out her dad was right all the time. The doorbell rang again, confirming its existence in her conscious world. She grabbed her bottle of Zoloft from the kitchen counter, popped a pill in her mouth, and chased it with a little water. As she walked toward the doorbell rang once more. She opened the door to find a courier walking down the sidewalk away from the door, with a small box about 3 inches on all sides in one hand, and an electronic signature pad in his other. Hearing the door open, he turned around and walked back to her. "Need a signature on this one," he told her as he handed her the signature pad. She signed for the package and exchanged his pad for the box. He thanked her, and she closed the door behind him as he left. She walked slowly across the living room, staring at the package in her hands. She knew what it was, and knew why she had ordered it. She had been so excited while she was waiting for it because she could hardly wait to see Hank's face when he opened it. She was supposed to wrap it for him today and give it to him tonight. She never forgot any celebration or special day, and always made sure it was special for him. She made sure that what she bought was something he would treasure. She had put a lot of thought and research into this little box. "Happy birthday, Hank," she said quietly, still staring at it. The disparate nature of their relationship hit her all at once, and she threw the little box across the room with every ounce of strength she had within her. It crashed against the wall behind the TV, shattering the contents despite its packaging. It dropped behind their media setup and out of sight. "Everything I did for you," she screamed. "Everything. And for what?" She collapsed on the couch, bawling into her hands, finally allowing her anger to come out. The best way to describe this reaction is somewhat like a tantrum, but not like a child who doesn't get his way. This was a woman whose emotional well-being had been torn in half, and her sanity stretched to the breaking point. Seated on the couch, she did stomp her feet on the floor and scream and pull at her hair, but it was the sort of display that would make even a friend stand back in alarm before gently trying to comfort in response. Unfortunately, Athena was alone, and because she knew she held nothing back. She had no one to keep it in for. At the end of it all, she was just whimpering and breathing heavily, having stormed herself into exhaustion. Before long, the doorbell rang again. Her wild, tear-stained eyes shot toward the door. Without a care for her out-of-control hair, she stormed over to it and tore it open. "What?" she yelled. No one was there. She sniffled and calmed down, wiping her tears and nose on her shirt sleeve. If there had been someone there, she would have felt awful about yelling at them the way she did. With no one there, however, she was more confused than anything else. She knew she had heard the doorbell ring. Or had she? She looked back and forth outside the door. "Hello?" She soaked in the sunshine, part of her grateful to be outside for a moment. She hadn't realized that she would find the sun so refreshing. She stepped outside fully and ran her fingers over her hair to smooth it out a little as she walked down her sidewalk. She took a deep breath and looked up and down the street. It was clear, except for the courier truck turning the corner as it left. She accepted that perhaps the bell was a trick of her mind, so she shrugged and walked back inside. When she closed the door behind her, she failed to notice the faceless figure in black standing behind the door, waiting for her. It was the middle of the day, so there were no shadows to obscure any aspect of its form. The dark clothing was loose enough not to be form-fitting, but it wasn't big either. The person also was clearly only wearing black socks rather than any kind of shoe, to further obscure any kind of investigation and allow her footfalls to remain silent. Athena walked obliviously into the living room, rubbing the raw emotion from her face. She heard a lock snick behind her and turned to see the faceless figure had locked the deadbolt. Athena froze as the figure walked toward her. The figure spoke in a raspy whisper, making identifying her voice impossible. If a person sins and does what is forbidden in any of the Lord's commands, even though she doesn't know it, she is guilty and will be held responsible. Athena only stared, not understanding the purpose of the words. She finally mustered the breath to say, "Who are you?" "The angel of death." The figure revealed the knife she held behind her back, and Athena found her feet. She ran for the back door and found it was locked. She fumbled with the deadbolt, which had always been a little tight, and figured out quickly that she would not get it open in time. She ducked away from the door as the figure approached and ran toward the front door. The figure jumped, planted a foot on the doorframe, and bounced away from the door. Athena reached the front door and easily unlocked the deadbolt. She tore the door open and ran outside. She didn't pause to look behind her as she ran across her lawn toward Kathy Brackett's house. She reached Kathy's door and pounded on it. "Kathy! Kathy, he's here! Oh my God, he's here!" No one answered the door. Athena looked around in a panic. She glanced across the yards between their houses and didn't see anyone following her. Her door remained as wide open as she left it, but there was no sign of the masked figure. She felt the world spin for a moment, nearly swooning from the aftermath of the adrenaline rush. Her hands shook as she put a hand to her head, wondering if she were going mad. "Athena, what's wrong?" Kathy said, surprising her. "Quick, get inside," Athena said, pushing Kathy inside her house. "Shut the door."